Ladies, gentlemen, thank you guys so much again. This, like I said, for me, great. Very happy, great honor to be doing this. So, yeah, I'm very excited to meet you guys, and let's get started, shall we?
Let's do it.
So, I want to start right with when and how did all of you guys learn about the Juneteenth holiday, and what did it mean to you guys at the time, and what does it mean to you all now?
Who's going first?
I'll go. It was a part of like my third, fourth grade curriculum, like a very brief little snippet. And then it was expanded upon during US history. I think they still do that eighth grade. And it was always so surprising to me how it was like a one paragraph or like one chapter read, and then oh, that's it. Very similar to like I'm half Japanese, half black. So I was like, oh, very similar to how like the whole Japanese little blip of history and Pearl Harbor and all that jazz is just it's very quick little interjection. That was what Juneteenth was. And I was like, oh wow, like this is probably something that's really important as a student to learn that is not really heavily taught in terms of curriculum. So I guess to very specifically answer your question, it was a piece of third and fourth grade and then eighth grade for about 2 seconds.
Yeah, I don't ever remember learning about it in school. I mean, so that's how small of a snippet, if it ever was even in my personal curriculum. But then like, I feel like in college is when I really, to start to explore, where I came from and everything to do with it. And that's kind of where I really did learn about Juneteenth.
Yeah, I'd say the same for me. I can't even remember learning about it in grade school at any point. And I guess a little bit what feels like an embarrassing thought for me is like the fact that I really didn't fully understand it until about last year, at the same time when I was starting to go through it in the league, that I never really understood what kind of was around it. So I think, yeah, I definitely looked at that question and kind of felt a little guilty for a couple seconds, realizing that last year was really only the first time I'd ever really started to think about it.
I'll be completely honest though. I even writing that, it was kind of in a way embarrassing for me because I also didn't learn. I don't think I learned anything about it in grade school, and I think I'm the only snippet that I heard about it might have been college, and it might have only been because I was a required diversity class, but outside of that, I've never heard of it. So I'm kind of glad that we're all in the same boat in that regard. And it kind of goes very easy, it goes very well to our second question. And how has this day grown in significance to you? And Tegan, we can actually start with you on this one, talking about, as you mentioned last year, how has this day grown in significance given everything that has happened as the years have gone on, and maybe a bit more so in 2020?
Yeah, I think that the significance behind this day has grown so much for me in the past year, and kind of, truly learning where I've come from and my community. And a big part of that last year with me was Kaya McCullough, who doesn't play with me anymore, but she ultimately was like my biggest teacher last year. And there was a lot that I didn't understand or didn't know. And she kind of helped me grow as a person. And as we've gone on through this year, and from last year, I've really realized like where I do personally come from, and just trying to understand more and more each and every day. So Juneteenth is definitely something that's helped me realize, and, I keep closely now to myself and think about quite a bit so I can continue to move forward with how we have over the past year.
Yeah, I'm not sure about y'all, but like for me last year, I didn't celebrate the 4th of July. Like it was all Juneteenth. And like, honestly, I'm on the same page as last year is really when I really learned about it. I was trying to like make my answer cute. Like, yeah, guys, I learned about this in college. But like, to be completely honest, that's when I actually did my research. But yeah, like it's crazy because it's like none of us celebrated the 4th of July. We're like, no, it's Juneteenth. And then like, maybe I'll look out my window and see the fireworks. But yeah, on the 4th of July. But yeah, that was it for that.
Yeah, I would kind of echo both of you all of it's grown in significance as I've become more and more aware of injustices and inequities that have not been corrected, or ones that were not built into an inclusive framework of kind of existence and the framework of our country. And I also, for anyone like viewing or listening or who will see this, I was like, I pulled up on the Smithsonian website. I was like, maybe we should define Juneteenth just so that there's a point of reference, because I can guarantee you there will be people tuning in who have no clue. What that's okay. Hopefully we will learn. So I'll read that like paragraph of, not everyone in the Confederate territory would immediately be free after the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective in 1863, it could not be implemented in places still under Confederate control. So as a result, in the westernmost Confederate state of Texas, enslaved people will not be free until much later. Freedom finally came on June 19th, 1865, when some 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. The Army announced more than 250,000 enslaved Black people in the state were free by executive decree. This day became known as Juneteenth, the newly freed people in Texas. So that's straight from the archives of the Smithsonian for those who are now hopefully a little bit more informed, but thought that might be a good thing to add into this discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Honestly, bringing that up and even mentioning that paragraph. I have no doubt in my mind that there probably are people who are a bit unaware of the significance of it. So I really appreciate that, Josh. And let's start with you for this one, actually, Josh. After the events of 2020 specifically, what did it mean to you to see Black athletes across the entire sports landscape come together and speak out in ways that we haven't seen really in previous years?
It meant a lot because I saw that athletes were being challenged to get uncomfortable in spaces that they're not typically in, whether that be an educational piece, like those of us on this call that, how do we need to inform and better inform ourselves so that we can articulate a stance, because they realize that they do have a platform. So it was cool to see that education and willingness to be made uncomfortable was created in a faster, more rapid pace. And it was cool to see that many athletes became very deferential to every other athlete coming before who have stood for issues of social justice, gender bias, gender inequities, and everything that allowed them to get to where they are on their platform now, to see that, where I am as a competing female soccer player on the field or basketball player or tennis star, that moment, yes, it's them doing it, but it's so much more than just them on the field, on the court at that moment. It's for generations to come. So that kind of leaning into the responsibility of using their platform for something beyond the field of play, I think was extraordinary.
Yeah, that was really well put. I also feel like it was, obviously, we all know how difficult the year was and emotional it was. And just like having other Black players like speaking out, it makes you feel like it was like a whole different kind of like community. Like we could hold each other up, because in moments, like throughout the last year, you'd be so emotional, maybe you couldn't do it today, but you have someone else that can do it for you. And so I think that also makes it super special.
Yeah, exactly what both of them said. And I think it also just added like a place where you didn't feel alone. Like I finally realized that, my voice had a space and I was never one to really use it before. And seeing all the other athletes being able to come out and speak about it just made me feel that much more empowered to also share, my stories, my voice, and, honestly make a lot more friends than I ever could have imagined over the past year through all of this.
No, and I think one of the biggest things that I want to say in regards to that for all you three is, for me, I just want to say thank you, because that was honestly very inspiring, the way everyone has spoke out in their own ways. Sarah, you and I, we talked about this like last February in an event pre-COVID and everything, and everything that the three of you guys said combined, like seeing you guys speak out about everything with the platform that you guys had made it easier for me, and I know other people who were not pro athletes and might not have that big platform, but it made us feel like if you guys can go out there and speak up and have this voice, and the everyday guy and girl can go ahead and speak up and be just as heard. So honestly, thank you all for that. It is the biggest thing. That's very inspiring. So thank you so much for that. And earlier in your guys' careers, and Sarah, we can start with you here actually. How would you describe your willingness to speak about racial injustices, and as your career's gone on, how much has that changed? What was that key moment that made that change?
Some of these questions are kind of loaded. Kind of Tegan, what you said, as far as like finding a space for your voice. I do feel very similar in that in the last year, I felt that way exactly. Like when you said that, I was like, snaps. Yes. Like I feel like now there is this space for my voice. And so I spoke up much more than I ever have, which I'm sure a lot of us have. But like, as far as in the past, I mean, like I have always, had kind of a confusing background and struggled with my racial identity. And so just within the past few years, and then specifically the past years when I really, just got comfortable with even, saying like I'm Black, and I'm sorry if that sounds really lame, but like being a mixed person, it is a different like struggle in that way. And so I think that I never knew that I would be as confident speaking on these things as I am. But I mean, in the last year I've arrived here.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of go off of that. I mean, I'm still pretty early in my career, I guess, so I haven't had much time. But yeah, I mean, even before I started to have a voice in the past year, I wouldn't even say like it wasn't really an option for me to speak up. I feel like I kind of, lived behind my privilege for a very long time, being, half Black, half white, and not really understanding the places that I grew up in, and the privilege that I got compared to most of my community. And I think it was definitely last year when it kind of came into check for me, and being able to speak to my family about it, and understanding that there was a lot more than just where we lived. And I know my parents always tried to do the best for me and my sister, to not make us feel the ways that they felt when they got married and all these things. And so I think it's definitely, that privilege side that came out, but then realizing within the last year that it's not just me, and it's not just who I am, but it's the community that I also want to stand with. And I think that's where I have felt the past year I have needed to use my voice more than ever. And if you ask, anyone in my family, I'm not one to normally speak up the way that I have in the past year. And I think that just, comes with all the people around me being able to speak up, and, they've made me feel like I have another voice too.
I love both Tegan and Sarah's responses, because it so perfectly magnifies what athletes are asked to do every single day, which is to be ruthlessly introspective to get the outcome desired, however uncomfortable that is. And that's something that you learn every day in training, as we all know. And the events of last year, obviously, social justice was brought to the forefront. And so it shows by practice that introspection is happening at all times. Now it's just more visible with people who have very large platforms and just happen to be really freaking good at their sport. And people look to them when they look for leaders, they look for the people that they admire. And by other athletes, Sarah and Tegan, doing that in itself is empowering to many people. Kind of back to your question around experience as being a Black athlete. Actually, I'll start it with in gymnastics. It wasn't a negative experience by any means. It was more or less there actually aren't that many Black people. Like, from like just representation wise, from my point of view, it was okay. I started watching the Olympics in 1996. Great. From the US, we have 2 people of a 14-person roster. And then the next Olympics, 0, or actually Dominique Dawes, but she did 3 Olympic games. So she was the representation of, there are Black gymnasts. Black gymnasts exist. They can get to the highest level. So it was just a matter of, is this not supported, or is this a non-supported route for sports to people of color. And that goes into a whole myriad of issues of privatizations and club and socioeconomics and everything. And kind of towing the line with Tegan's experience of kind of being sheltered from it by my parents as well. Like I'm literally the only Black person in my family. I was adopted into a beautiful family. My mom's Japanese, my dad's white, and my 2 older sisters are white. So I'm like the token Black guy. So I did not know what those, I guess, traditional injustices, inequities, blatant racism, lack of opportunity looked like because of just my own personal circumstance. To then say, oh, it was actually incumbent upon me to learn more. Okay, what are these systemic injustices as it pertains to Black people in America? And then magnify it within sport, magnify it within your sport. And then, okay, we've done a lot of the learning. How can we then speak to it as kind of a living representation of someone who is visible in their own sport and can speak to issues of race and inequality at a level that actually makes sense and is not just touting headlines that they see on the news.
Wait, Josh, also sidebar, that's crazy because I was also adopted into a white family. So but I feel everything you guys were saying about being sheltered and honestly being privileged to the point where that I didn't really have to look into these things until recently. But wow, we have a similarity there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so cool because I know you two both understand it, and as well as any listeners and probably a lot of other individuals on this call, like sports, it can oftentimes be that haven. It can be that shelter. It can be that safe place and inclusive framework, as it should be, which is even more of a responsibility of like, oh, okay, yeah, this is that safe space. It should be. We're going to talk about how we can make it an even more inclusive space for everyone else coming up the ranks.
How would you guys say some of or in what key ways your experiences as Black athletes differs or differed from those of your non-Black teammates or people that you've just been around in your respective sports coming up through the ranks?
I guess I'll go. I don't want to say it differed as though, because when people are asked this or when this topic is brought out into the ether, I think a lot of people are looking for that. Oh, they were ostracized, they were denigrated, they were set aside. That was not my experience. I think the only difference is that I would look around and not very many people who looked like me. And I didn't even notice this until the later years in college. Across the platform, I was like, there was maybe 1 or 2 people of color on each team. Like, okay, like clearly we gotta find a better pipeline or better point of access at the club level for people of color to really come into this framework. So I did not have that differential treatment or that type of sentiment in my sport as a Black athlete, but I just very clearly recognized that there were few Black athletes in my sport. I have to bring up Dominic Dawes, Gabby Douglas, specific to gymnastics, Dominic Dawes, Gabby Douglas, obviously now Simone Biles, like their impact in the sport of not only being incredible female athletes, but just them being there. There are so many other gymnasts of color, 5 and under, that can now say, oh my God, like, yeah, I want to be like Simone. There are other white, Asian, Hispanic athletes saying, I want to be like Simone. And it's normalizing the full spectrum of color at the highest level of sports.
I guess one of the things that's kind of popped into my head while thinking, I don't want to make a huge deal of it, but just, I guess some different experiences are like when you, especially in team sports, when you come into a new environment, trying to figure out where you fit in. And when you don't see people who look like you, you're like, how are they going to take me? How are we going to be here? And it's almost like you start to see some of these athletes group together. In every team sport, there's always cliques, there's always things, but sometimes you end up seeing the Black the Black girls ending up being closer on the team than others, because you feel like you have this unspoken bond between people, and it's easier for other people to fit in on these teams when you look like the person standing next to you, and almost kind of being afraid of, what people might think of you if you act differently around them, and just always being conscious of like how you speak, when you speak, like why you do, and making sure that you want to fit in, even though, there's no reason that you should be thinking that. But I guess it kind of just comes with the fact that, like you said, when you look up and you don't see people who really look like you, it's a little bit harder to know that you fit into an area, in a space.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that growing up and like going back to being sheltered, I didn't really even think about it. But now, I mean, as far as how my experience differs, I just like immediately think about what happened to my family in Houston. And I'm like, I think my experience differs because other people on my team would never have to be put in a situation or be made to feel that way. And I think, yes, it's little things like fitting in, what you say and how you say it. Although a lot of that is natural, like, like when you're around your friends, you talk more Black. When you're around your friends, you talk more white. It's fine. Sometimes it mixes, but, and as far as like style, nails, like hoop earrings, like things like that, kind of for me, I always kind of feel like, I don't want to say I want to like dim myself, but like I'm a loud person, but I have a loud personality, and sometimes I kind of just want to shrink because I don't want people to like point out my baby hair, like that I laid my baby hairs or something like that. And so, like it's these small things, but I mean, I would say that's how my experience personally differs.
I'm intrigued because I don't come from a heavily team sport landscape. When Sarah and Tegan, when you all kind of walk into that, whether it's team, collegiate, now professional, like what does that feel like? What is because obviously team chemistry is everything on the field. How does that enhance or detract from the end result, which would be a win over, and how long does it take to really bring that to the table to be like, okay, team, like we got all our differences aside and we're here to win? And like, what does that look like in weaving the relationships within a very clearly team sport? That just fascinating to me because I don't know what that is. I've never experienced it.
Tegan?
It's a
sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, you're good.
Honestly, once again, I never thought about like any of this until last year, until we were put into these conversations. And I think there's some days where it feels, hopeless sometimes, but there's other days where here, at least at Washington, is kind of, what I've struggled with the most is just being like, there's the soccer field and there's off the soccer field. So internalizing it on the field, just to not really have the conversations off the field, is one of like the hardest things. So like, people want to have these conversations, they want to do these things, but then they expect it to not follow them, even though we're still playing together. And, we do our best to not let it affect us on the field. And I don't think it has to this day, but I think it's, it's easier for people to turn off their minds in these conversations when the conversations are over, but we're still constantly left with it every single day. When that conversation is over, they get to turn it off, but we don't. And so they feel sometimes like it's just a switch that can flip. So it's like, okay, like, yeah, we had this conversation, now get out there and play. Like that should be like the easiest thing for you. And you're like, it's, in the last year, you find it harder and harder, especially when you try to put yourself out there to have conversations with people, to let them know how you feel and they want to know. But yet again, it's just so even hard to explain that, like, it never stops for us, but like it can stop for other people, which is the hardest part to, really wrap your head around when you want to make a difference, when people want to learn from you, but they only want to learn in some aspects of their life.
Yeah. And it can be so hard, like exactly what you said. And also then like having to have relationships with these people, because like you said, chemistry, like this is how, you win games is through like good relationships on the field. And so I think it can be really hard to put it aside and walk on the soccer field. But then at the same time, for me, soccer is like my sanctuary. It's where I get away from life. So now it's like all of this is pulled into one. It's been this huge battle. And I don't think I don't know. And then there's like the whole human of wanting to belong. And so, like I said before, sometimes I'll have to like shut it down for a week because I'm like, I need to belong this week. I don't need to, have the conversations. I don't need to call someone out or have, say this wasn't like, I just want to belong. Like, I just want to be liked this week. So like, it's like a total struggle being pulled in different directions. And I think at times you just have to compartmentalize it because it's our job at the end of the day to play soccer, to play soccer well, to have build relationships with people on and off the field. And so it's taken a lot for me compartmentalizing different things.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how much like it takes to like compartmentalize this stuff. Like for them, it's just like I said, they just get to turn it off and keep walking. And you're like, okay, now I just had this conversation where I opened up about experiences that I've never opened up with people about before. And now I got to turn that completely off and flip my mind to something different where I just don't think about it for the next, practice, next 90 minutes, what it is. So there's just weeks where you're like, I am just shutting down for the week. Like I can't this week. And, it makes you feel guilty. But then you're also like mentally and like emotionally, it's just so much on you. And then to go, do your job at the same time, sometimes, you do just have to think about yourself and the job. And I think that's where I found myself lately for sure.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Sorry, Connor, I didn't want to hijack the moderation, but I was just very intrigued because from the athlete mind, that will always kind of be my baseline to a lot of things is knowing that you operate very well and you can pull more out of yourself when you're operating from a headspace of just clarity and freedom. And looking at women's soccer and just the inequities that exist with women's sports, and then add color, and then potentially add sexual orientation. It's like, in what scenario do the athletes, with compounding externalities like that, how do they find a way to be that superstar athlete with all of the pressures? How do they find that headspace of clarity to deliver something that they're so passionate about? So that was the root of my question.
Oh, dude, do not apologize. It is all good. Trust me, you're all good. Talking about the conversations, like all three of you have mentioned in that last question, even what do we do, or what can we do as Black people in sports, whether it's in front offices, athletes, fans, whoever, what do we need to do next to ensure that conversations like the ones we're having continue and that our voices are not only heard, but understood?
Yeah, can someone actually answer that for me? Because I'm trying to get to that point still. I'm still trying to get there.
Sarah, Tegan, and myself come from a very interesting space of Black identity, Black heritage, based upon just our upbringing. For me, to answer that question, I think it's just a full ownership and kind of leaning into that your presence as an athlete of color, whatever color that might be. In this case, it's Black. It's powerful and it's heard just by being there. So kind of owning that piece is powerful in itself by the athlete. And then kind of, again, I'll lean back into, for myself, it's fascinating because I feel as though it's always something that I can further educate myself on. Like, what are these conversations? How do we draw substance more than headlines? How do we draw action more than rhetoric, good or bad, to just bring awareness to these conversations that aren't being had? The fact that they are now happening is great. They've been happening in small segments over periods of time, and we can look all the way back to Althea Gibson, Jackie Robinson, so on and so, Arthur Ashe, all of the heralded athletes. But I think now that it's taking place in a more open forum, and you do not need to be the creme de la creme to have impact in that space or just admired visibility. I think is very important.
Yeah, and I like the idea of kind of starting within the space that we're in, which is soccer, and going from there. So like just, coming forward with any experiences we have, because we want this soccer to be a space of being inclusive of Black people, Black athletes, Black families, all people, of course. But so I think starting within our own space is a good place to start. And like you said, continuing to speak, because at the end of the day, like, we as athletes are role models. People are looking up to us. People find our voices important. And so using the voice is really the basic foundation of where we can begin.
Exactly what both Josh and Sarah have said, that our, voices are one of our biggest allies, and we have to keep using those in order to, allow people time to grow, time to learn, because I don't think it happens overnight for everyone. And I think that's the most important thing to take away is, I understand we've been patient for hundreds of years, but to keep being patient with people. And I guess that's like the hardest thing too, because you can never, we can say we want to make sure that our voices are understood, and we can talk as much as we want, but the understanding has to come from the other side. And that comes with time and space. And that's the hardest part, is knowing that we can't control if other people at the end of the day understand or not. And I think that's the most, how do I put it? That's definitely the most frustrating part, is that we don't actually have control at the end of the day if people want to understand where we're coming from or not. And so being able to continue using our voices, I think, is one of the most powerful things. And it's not an easy thing to do, because all you want is for people to understand. And at the end of the day, we may still not get that from certain people, but we continue to do it because we feel so strongly about how we feel and, what world we want to live in.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but even like, I'm in this space right now where it's like difficult to continue to like have this what we have going on right here. Like, of course it's a beautiful thing, let's celebrate Juneteenth, let's talk about it. It's actually difficult for me to answer these questions right now, just because I feel like exhausted of answering the same questions and talking about the same things. And like, of course I want to be a source for people to learn and people, whatever, but it's hard, and I don't know. Sorry, like that was totally like handed to me, but like I'm like super drained in that way. And like I'm not asking anyone to like feel bad for me or anything, but that's just why my answers right now have been so like cookie cutter, because I'm like, it's hard for me to even get there at this time.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the most difficult part, is having the conversations over and over again. And once again, not feeling like people are catching on, and you're like,
right. And then like doing the panels and like the discussions over and over, and kind of just feeling like, let me leave it there.
just, the people who will actually listen, and the people who will understand. And then there's the other ones that you're just like, I don't know if I'll ever get through to you. And that's the hardest part.
I think that's amazingly powerful what Sarah and Tegan, you just said, because you're in it, you're living it, you're breathing, being asked all the questions, you are the visible faces on the field. And I think it's to you two specifically, it's saying your sharing of your story and experience is showing like literally that constant just onslaught, and you're just tired and frustrated, but you are showing compassion by doing it. By wanting to teach compassion, you are actively showing it at every one of these opportunities. And just the fact that you said, that other people won't get it, it might take them a year, 2 years, generations of families, who knows, but you've accepted that, okay, great, I know that exists, I'm still going to be respectful, compassionate, and share my experience because it's important. And just by doing that, that's what you're wanting to teach, more than the Black experience and inequities and systemic racism and injustices that have occurred. It's that compassion piece that you are literally teaching by being visible. So I commend you both for that.
And then the final question that I have for you guys you know, if there's one sentiment or feeling that you guys hope that the community attending the Juneteenth game day celebration, you know, if there's anything that they can take away from all those experiences, the programming, everything, what do you all hope that would be?
I have to be careful here, and I have no qualms saying this because I do not speak for the Chicago Red Stars organization. But it's that by bringing this Juneteenth program into the calendar, it's not, oh, let's do a CYA for all things Black heritage and Black community and Black history. Like that I hope the community feels that way by every other thing that this team, this organization, this sporting community stands for, which is inclusion across the board. So I hope the community attending this Juneteenth game brings about, oh yeah, here's something that I should be a little bit more educated on. It's amazing that this is part of year-round, 24/7, 365 inclusive programming by this Chicago sports team. And this is what sports in the playing field is all about. So I kind of put it into broader context, and hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I'd say definitely, just this feeling of like, I guess, how do I say it? A feeling of almost inspiration to want to continue to, have these experiences and understand and learn and grow. So like an inspiration around, what we're trying to accomplish moving forward in our world, I guess, is the best way that I can put it.
Yeah. And also on a different note, I would say just like this Juneteenth, take a day to just kind of look at over time what Black people have been through, what they've overcome, and like the beautiful culture, art, music surrounding Black culture, like been through hell, but like still like such a beautiful culture. And like maybe take a day to celebrate that, learn something new about the culture that you didn't know.
Perfect. No, I honestly believe that's the perfect way to cap this off. So once again, Josh, Tegan, Sarah, thank you guys so much for not only doing this, but for being an inspiration in each of your own ways to me, and I know to countless others. I'm excited to even just be a part of this game in some form or fashion. And yeah, I'm just thank you again for taking the time out for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.